The NSPCC this week put its weight behind a campaign to revamp sex education in our schools. The child protection charity wants children to be taught the dangers of online pornography. They say the current system has made girls feel like they have to look and perform like porn stars to be liked by boys. Claire Perry MP, who's leading a parliamentary review of online child protection, also said in a blog, the rise of sexting, online bullying, porn and young people documenting their entire lives on the web needs to be a core tenet of how we teach sex and relationships. We may not like it, but growing numbers of children are learning about sex from watching pornography on the internet. The NSPCC says it's warping young people's attitudes towards relationships. A new film, In Real Life, to be released on September the 20th, looks at the relationship between children, the internet and social media. Part of the film seems to back up what the NSPCC is saying.
They're perfect, like, that's what you want, that's what you'd look for. You'd sort of try out a girl and get a perfect image of what you've watched on the internet. I find now that it's so hard for me to actually feel the connection for a girl.
The NSPCC says the influence of pornography needs to be challenged in the classroom. But Education Secretary Michael Gove is against updating advice on sex education because he believes rapidly changing technology and social attitudes could render such guidance out of date. Instead, he said, the right thing is to trust teachers. But on his radio phone-in, the Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg said teachers do need more guidance.
I suspect all parents want their teenage sons and daughters to be not just given, if you like, the biological facts of life, but also to be given some sex and relationship guidance. And I think it doesn't matter what school they go to, that should be made available to them. This is not shared across government. I haven't been able to persuade Michael Gove and the Conservatives to move all the way on this.
So if we accept that internet pornography is being accessed by many of our children, what is the best way to approach it in the classroom? So should children be taught about pornography in schools? You can join in by webcam or make your point by phone, text, email or online. And we're joined now for this discussion by Zoe Margolis, who's a journalist and the author of the book Girl with a One-Track Mind. Zoe, there's so much anxiety about the effect of pornography on young people. What should we be teaching, if anything, in schools about it?
Well, obviously, sex education needs to be brought up to date. It was last updated in the year 2000. Things have moved on online. It needs to reflect the modern way that young people are accessing information, and they are accessing information about sex online because they're not receiving it in schools. There isn't statutory decent sex education, and that absolutely needs to be modernised and updated.
How would you modernise it? I mean, would you talk about pornography and different kinds of it? I mean, people just wonder about whether you need to mention porn. You can have sex education perhaps without it.
Well, you see, we're focusing on porn as the big aspect of it, and what it's about is sex education and sex and relationship education as a whole needs to be improved. So young people need to be taught age-appropriate education about sex and relationships, which includes things like behaviour and boundaries and consent and friendships and relationships and body image issues, homosexuality, all different things that are about young people gaining information that will make them feel confident to make proper, informed choices later on in life.
Bishop Michael, you know, we know that pornography is there and it is having an impact, whether we like it or not. Do we not just have to accept that it needs to be discussed in schools as part of that sex education?
Well, yes, but I think this is not just a question about abstractions needs to be discussed or we need to have it. I mean, how do we do it? And the first thing is that in the question about relationships and sex education, I would put it that way around, actually, by the way, parents and schools need to agree what should be taught. I mean, parents are very important here in the growing up of their children, in the formation of their minds.
But specifically, we'll go into parents in a bit more detail. Should schools be discussing it? And should, for example, they have a moral message about pornography, whether it's morally acceptable or not?
Well, yes, I mean, I think schools should be discussing, as Zoe has said, the full range of what people can experience in life. But this has to be agreed with parents. I mean, there's no problem about this. A good school will agree such a delivery of a course with parents. But of course, what is then taught, and I would put relationships first,
Okay,
Because,
but I mean, I know no one's quite talking about the porn here.
I'm happy
and
to talk about
good,
porn
because
with you,
people
Samira.
wonder, at what age do you talk about pornography? You can talk about the facts of life, but when do you talk about that?
I think in this country we generally don't do things early enough, okay? So we allow children to learn in the playground, or when the giggle factor set in, and other countries that do talk about things much earlier, in age-appropriate language, are shown to actually delay sexual activity, have lower rates of pregnancy and lower rates of sexually transmitted diseases. So with pornography, you can do the research to work out when children are going online and when they're likely to be exposed.
Because it's as young as 10, isn't it?
Exactly, and tell them that that isn't how most people have sex. It's not how most people, both men and women, enjoy sex, and they shouldn't assume that it's normal, because it's the normalisation of what's quite weird.
Yeah, I mean, Zoe, that's the concern, isn't it? I know there's a debate about whether porn is a good or a bad thing, but a lot of it can be very, that children access easily can be incredibly unpleasant, and it can be incredibly misogynistic.
It can. I think we need to look at the reasons why young people might be accessing porn. And actually, the main reason that Brooke, the Young People's Sexual Health Charity, of whom I'm an ambassador, they did a survey of young people, and they discovered that young people are accessing it partly by mistake, because they're seeking information about sex and relationships, and they look online because that's the medium they're used to using, and this is what they're receiving. So they need sex and relationships education first.
But if they're not getting it first, what do you tell them? That this stuff is unrealistic, as Evan says, or more than that, that this is exploitative? I mean, what are the sort of ethical words we should use about
It's hard
porn?
to teach it without a proper context in which it's based. So if you're just teaching it in and of itself without proper sex and relationship education, young people won't be able to have a critical view of it. But young people are able to view it critically. We have to give them credit here. Most of the young people that Brooke approached and did a survey on said, we know it's not real, but we also don't have anything else that we're being taught that's substantial.
Is it enough to tell them it's not real?
Well, yes, but I think those lines can be blurred, and I mean, I think there are three things that they should know about at home or in school. One, that it can be addictive. I mean, once you get hooked onto it, then you go on to more and more hardcore material. Secondly, there is now research from America and indeed here that it can be imitative, that it can lead to imitating behavior that people have seen. Now, what they can see on the internet is pretty horrendous. And thirdly, of course, it is the commodification of sex, the abuse of women, particularly, not only, but particularly that, and they ought to be aware of this.
I think that's all right. I'm a pleasure to agree with you,
well,
Bishop Michael, and it's very important, you see, women, the pressure's huge on girls to have the right body that the mass media promote. And what I find astonishing is that there's all this outrage in the tabloid newspapers about pornography, and yet they're the same newspapers that have objectifying pictures of women on page 3 at eye level, and indeed upskirt shots on the front of Sunday newspapers at eye level for children to pick up to make it normal. So the hypocrisy that you see in some of the commentating on this is what's also damaging the debate.
Which is why it's so important for young people and children to receive age-appropriate information about relationships and sex, which includes things like body image and friendships and boundaries and consent. And these are things that weren't included and still aren't included on the curriculum, and absolutely should be.
I want to just bring in Mary Russell here from the Family Education Trust. You've heard, I mean, our panellists and we all agree that age-appropriate discussions about pornography is important. What do you feel?
Well, the first thing, good morning, is that I would say that in many cases the accusation that parents are inadequate, incompetent and unable to impart so much knowledge themselves is a theme that runs through many of the sex educators' thinking. It has a grain of truth in it, in that very many parents would be extremely uncomfortable in imparting the sort of sex education that's promoted by today's programmes.
But you know,
the
Mary,
idea about
Mary, briefly, just briefly, there is a concern that too many parents don't talk to their children about sex, and that's why they're going online and they're, they're looking at perhaps inappropriate material. Don't we have to make teachers take some of this responsibility?
Well, the fact is that teachers will be expected to discuss pornography in the class, and that means defining pornography. And who defines pornography? What defines pornography? Because it wasn't that long ago that some of today's sex education would have been classed as pornography. So they have a difficulty there. Someone has to define it, someone has to discuss it, and therefore you're putting in the children ideas and information that probably would not normally occur to them. If these people were really genuine in safeguarding and protecting children, I would say they should channel all their energies, all their focus on the source of the pornography, the distribution of it, and the fact that it's so easily accessed on the internet.
Mary, thank you. I'm sorry about the poor quality of line.
Trying to close down pornography.
Just let Evan start and then
good luck trying to close down pornography. I think you'll find your hands full there. The issue is, you can't say we shouldn't teach it because it's hard to define. It's hard to define what the boundaries are in families of touching, okay? But it's vital that that's done at an early age. It would have protected, I think, many young children, enabled them to report inappropriate, effectively sexual abuse at a much earlier stage if they were taught, possibly outside the family, because that's where much of it takes place, that certain things are unacceptable. So I don't think we should allow the fact that it's difficult for it not to be done. Other countries manage to do it.
OK, Bishop Michael first and then Zoe.
I mean, I agree with that last comment, by the way. But I think that Mary's concerns would be answered if there was a dialogue between school and parents about what actually is taught.
Right, but the problem with that is that young people actually have problems talking to their parents about sex. And in the survey that Brooke did, they found that young people really didn't get enough sex information from parents. So you can't rely on parents to either be informed or to impart that knowledge to children.
No, but it has
to be made as part of the statutory curriculum.
That's right. You have to talk to parents, but you can't give them a veto, because if parents said parents should send their children to a faith school, you mustn't say anything positive about homosexuality. That's wrong. That would be the wrong thing to do. So I'm saying
this is
no
the first
veto
step. This is the first. No, but I disagree.
No,
I don't know what a veto means, but I think.
Well, a veto means parents couldn't make their children opt out of these classes.
Well, but they can at the moment.
But
they can opt out of sex education.
People have a right
yes,
to
but why not do something positive?
In my opinion, this is a violation of young people's rights. We're not giving them the background and basis of understanding about relationships in society.
But this is the first.
Young people, they then
this is the first step. I'm sorry to say, this is the first step towards state totalitarianism, is to exclude parents.
No, that's not
always
more ignorance is never the right answer.
All right, well, let me just bring in, I want to bring in the NSPCC briefly, which is Chris Cloak kindly joins us. You're Head of Child Protection Awareness, and we've been discussing that very much. We all understand the concerns, but there's also a concern from that parents group we heard from, that in a way you could normalise porn by discussing it in schools, and that in a way it's the wrong focus. Can you understand that? Right, I don't know if you've got, just bear with us, we've got a problem with the sound. No, can we have one more go? Chris, can you try speaking to us again? No, I'm really sorry. We'll try and get you back. Come back.
Normalising it. I think that we have to also give young people credit here. They know what pornography is. It's a genie. We can't put it back in the bottle. It exists. We have to then be able to give them information about it within the context of a wider sex and relationships education. And once they have that, they'll be able to view it as they do with a critical eye and know that it's not necessarily related to real life.
I wonder, is the comparison some people would make to, say, junk food, where, you know, a lot of it's marketed at young people to get them consuming, and perhaps treating it as a product rather than even something which is about sex might be helpful.
Isn't there a need? We know that there's bullying and teasing of young people, often about their bodies, sometimes about sex, sometimes, you know, around puberty and beyond. And unless it's talked about in the classroom, it's really hard to break into that and give the children the resources to be able to deal.
But also the how. I mean, it's abstinence, like as in smoking. Children are educated about smoking, but there are things like drink, which is not illegal but has huge social consequences. How do you talk about porn? Should you be talking about abstinence or something more qualified, Bishop Michael?
Well, the word pornography means evil right. I mean, that's what it means, the writing of evil. Now, you can extend that to pictures and so forth. This is very different from art. It is very different from guidance.
Do you regard pornography as evil?
Pornography, yes, that is what it means.
I'm going to have to respond to that, because although I do believe that 95% of pornography is really awful and sexist and racist and misogynistic, there's another 5% which is feminist, which is female positive, which is inclusive, and which can actually be a very positive learning thing, not necessarily for young people, but for older people to understand what healthy sex and relationships can be. And we shouldn't just discount it all across the board and say it's morally evil.
We managed to get Chris Cloak back from the NSPCC. Briefly, we were wondering about the concerns parents might have have, that discussing porn in schools might kind of normalise it and say it's a natural part of growing up, and maybe it shouldn't be.
Yes, I don't think that's a problem at all, really. I think my concern is that at the moment, children and young people are kind of bombarded with sexualised and violent images all the time, and I think that's what really leads to kind of normalisation. What we want is age-appropriate education in schools which can talk to young people so that they can learn what is the appropriate way to treat each other, how they should respond to pornography, and what they can do if they come across pressures on them to make them behave in a way which they feel uncomfortable with. We think it won't normalise it, and indeed if we're kind of sweeping it away, that's what's kind of tending to normalise it, because we know that many young people, of course, are accessing these images all the time.
Thank you, Chris. You put that so beautifully. I just want to bring in some viewer comments on this. Elizabeth says children should be taught about sex in schools, but not about pornography. Children are losing their innocence too quickly these days. Patricia says, I think it's good to be aware. Children need to be informed about sex, and then they won't be bombarded with information in the playground. And Julian says, why is it schools' responsibility? Parents need to learn about the internet and engage. We have to end it there. Thank you all so much, because we have your poll votes in on the question we asked. Do our hospitals lack compassion? And here's what you told us. 68% of those of you who voted said yes, they do, and 32% said no, they don't. Now, we won't get into the technicalities of how many people voted, but there is a concern, Evan, about this, isn't there, briefly?
And there's right to be a concern, because one case is too many. But I'm just saying you shouldn't take examples, single examples, and extend it to the whole of the profession. But we do need to ensure that we know what's going on, and that's why it's good that these cases are brought to light, so they're tackled.
Zoe?
I can't disagree with anything that Evan said.
I mean, you saw the discussion, but it is interesting. People are concerned. It's particularly about the elderly and the way they're treated. Is that maybe about social attitudes?
Yes, but I don't think that that's necessarily just relevant to hospitals. I think that as a society we could be more caring and compassionate overall, but I don't think that's something that needs to be taught to people in that profession. Surely that's just a humanity issue.
In a sentence,
yes, taught, not taught. I don't think it's a matter just of individuals. I think there is a systemic issue here which people have picked up, which reports have picked up, and I think it ought to be addressed.
Thank you so much to all of you. Thank you to everybody who's taken part today, to all my guests who contributed via webcam, to my guests in the studio, Zoe Margolis, Bishop Michael Nazir Ali and Christina Rees and Evan Harris. Don't text or call the phone lines anymore. They are now closed, but you can continue the conversation online. The links are all on our website. Sunday Morning Live isn't here next week. We'll be back in a fortnight, and I hope you'll join us all then. But from me, Samira Ahmed, and from everybody on the Sunday Morning Live team, enjoy the rest of your weekend, and goodbye.